all. My name is Namita Datta, and I'm head of solutions for youth employment. It's a global program that's hosted in the World Bank, and it brings together, excuse me, brings together a large number of partners. So we have quite a few donors and foundations, about 44 NGOs, large NGOs that are running youth employment programs in different parts of the world, and about 40 private companies, leading private companies. A lot of them are technology leaders. Also, young people themselves are part of our network, and of course, World Bank operational teams. We have about 150 operations in the World Bank that focus on youth employment, about 17 billion collectively that the World Bank invests. So this whole global program is hosted here in the bank. And our focus really is we are constantly looking for innovation. Like, what is innovative that is happening in the ecosystem around us on the youth employment agenda as we speak? Because business as usual hasn't really worked. And we are constantly looking for partners who are trying new things. And particularly, we are interested in how does one, even if there is something new and innovative, how does one really wrap your head around taking it to scale? Because that's a really hard nut to crack. How do you take something innovative, good, and how do you take it to scale? And so that context, we are very delighted that today we are going to shine the spotlight on Coursera. I think I don't need to introduce Coursera. And they have recently, ever since COVID happened last year, they launched what they call their Workforce Recovery Initiative. It's an initiative at scale. And we all know right now, employment, education, learning, all of this is pivoting to online, to the online format. But how has Coursera done it? How have they thought about this strategy? I'm so delighted that we have two speakers from Coursera. I'm so happy that Matthew, you're able to join us. Matthew Klein, who's the head of Coursera's international public sector practice, and Chad Basha, who is senior advisor in the government partnerships team at Coursera. So Matt will he will kick us off. He will tell us a little bit about what is this initiative? How did Coursera design it? Why did they design it? What were some things and factors that went into its design? And then Chad will give us the view from the ground, literally, and he will talk to us about the nuts and bolts of their initiative. How did it play out in Philippines, for example, or in the Caribbean? So we're really excited that they're able to share with us. But before I hand it over to Coursera, I wanted to also invite Shannon. Shannon Atkinson is the lead on everything edtech in the IFC. And most of you know IFC is the part of the World Bank group that focuses on the private sector. And her team has worked quite closely with Coursera. So over to you, Shannon, and a very warm welcome to you all. I also wanted to say quickly before Shannon, I shut and I let you talk. I wanted to say to all of you that we normally keep these sessions very informal. So because are speaking, feel free to put your comments in the chat box. I'll try and keep track of them. And then also, but if you could also keep yourselves muted so that we don't run into any technology glitches. So with that, over to you, Shannon, and warm welcome again.
Thanks again, Namita. I'm really thrilled to have the chance to participate in this webinar this morning and to hear from Matt and Chad about how Coursera has been working with governments during COVID to help their workforces get the digital skills that have clear links to employability. We all know the digital skills challenge is not new. IFC and the World Bank have been working with governments for several years to create roadmaps to help countries digitize their economies. And many countries face huge challenges in retraining and upskilling large segments of their workforce in the effort to build a high value knowledge economy, where workers lack access to digital infrastructure and lack the digital skills to participate. And this digital divide and the human capital divide also was already in play when COVID hit, accelerating the situation through massive layoffs and dislocations in many countries. So at IFC, we've been working with the private sector in a number of ways to meet the digital skills challenge. In the upstream side, we help countries build ecosystems that are favorable for edtech innovation and private sector participation. And we do, things like piloting education PPPs. IFC also creates tailored advisory services that work with education industry participants, such as the tool we have now that helps higher education institutions digitize effectively and cost efficiently, often through partnering with edtech. And we invest directly in edtech companies themselves. Edtech companies are agile, are constantly innovating, and are able to deliver skills that link employers and job seekers at scale. And edtech companies like Coursera are leveraging machine learning and AI to do this with increasing efficiency and personalization. So, I'm proud to say that IFC was an early investor in Coursera way back in 2013 when the term edtech barely existed and Coursera was only about a year old. At that time, Daphne Culler came to IFC and pitched to some of our people at that time, the global education team, and they were inspired by Coursera's vision, which was already through the partnership with top schools, was offering massive open online courses, MOOCs, and had already reached 3.5 million learners. And a large number of those were in emerging markets back in 2013. Since then, Coursera has kept up this leadership through constant innovation, through driving to understand the needs of learners, through partnering with higher ed, with corporates, with big tech, and with governments, and creating synergies among these industry players. And Coursera took leadership again a year ago, March 2020, when they saw universities struggling to go online. And they offered the Coursera catalog free to universities and students. And then a month later, they offered the same initiative on access to governments, and that's what we'll hear about in a minute. So I'm just really amazed by Coursera's vision and growth, already reaching 80 million registered learners, and staying true to the founder's vision of creating a world where anyone, anywhere has the power to transform their life through learning. So with that, back to you, Namita. Over to Matt and Chad. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to share your experience.
Thank you, Shannon. Matt, the floor is yours. You have slides to share, I guess.
I do, and thank you so much for that intro, Shannon. Wonderful. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Let me briefly share my screen and let me know if this is coming through okay. Although everyone's on mute, great. Wonderful. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Matthew Klein. I manage our international public sector practice at Coursera. My colleague Chad is a senior advisor on our government team and has been working directly with many of the country teams that we've been running these programs with over the past year. And we're excited to share a bit about what we've been doing with you, why we've been doing it, how the program came to be, and really, I think most critically, some of the best practices that we've learned, we've seen from different country initiatives, both before COVID, but especially as a lot of these initiatives ramped up. And then in the second part of the presentation, we're going to talk you through some specific case study examples of how different countries have actually enacted these programs at scale. So to start, I think, especially with this audience, everyone is well aware of the challenges. This was an interesting time where we saw a double disruption, both from automation that had already been taking place, as well as the impact of COVID. And as this group knows, we have approximately 85 million jobs being displaced over the next several years. A lot of the core skills being replaced. So even more than jobs disappearing, what we're really dealing with is core skills changing. And the skills needed for people in jobs to be able to do their jobs more effectively, but also changing because job skills are changing, different types of training being needed from institutions training people for specific roles. As all that is going on, and that's what we've been dealing with over the past couple of years and help governments, universities, and companies to address, we had the impact of COVID. And so recent studies say that 42% of COVID-induced layoffs are expected to be permanent, and 91% in the US of businesses have been using COVID to accelerate digitalization. And I'll briefly flash through, some of the automation impact is, again, as many of you know, is not felt equally. And so a lot of the impact of automation was being hit on cashiers and retail sales and freight movers and personal carriers. A lot of these industries like cashiers and burger flippers are things that are easily automatable, right? Anything you can automate, it's a process that can repeat. And we were seeing that before COVID hit, and that was disproportionately impacting communities. And in COVID, again, we saw something similar, where the lowest skilled jobs were actually being hit hardest by COVID. Again, no surprise to anyone, but it made us sit back and say, well, what can Coursera do? And at the same time as this was happening, again, as we know, a lot of companies really have been taking these opportunities to accelerate digitalization. So a lot of the same trends that these companies were facing and needing to fill roles has only been accelerating. And so 100 million software development roles that needed to be filled, 23 million data and cloud roles, data analysis and machine learning roles, cybersecurity roles. A lot of these roles that are open and that need people actively have tended to be digital. And so we saw a unique opportunity where we could provide support in this time. Interestingly, as we started dealing with workforce development agencies, there are a number of challenges in the workforce systems that were exposed. And again, these challenges should not be news to anyone. Workforce ecosystems have been overwhelmed by the number of displaced workers. We saw that even free programs were difficult for certain systems to accept based on regulatory requirements and the way these actual workforce systems were set up. We saw that skills or needs are often evolving faster than most of the training providers can respond. And so we see this across the board at Coursera, where the constant information that we get from companies on the cutting edge skills that they need often is several years ahead of the actual training program's ability to adjust, to see these signals in the market and be able to adjust those programs to provide exactly those skills that companies need. And then finally, I'll just mention that public budgets were severely hit by COVID. And across country after country after country, many of the budgets that were spent on training programs were diverted towards health, and likely rightly so for that early response. But what that meant is a lot of the retraining that needed to quickly follow wasn't necessarily well funded and well prioritized. So what did we do as Coursera? We decided that first, we would support universities. And as Shannon mentioned, we launched an initiative to support universities, helping to put some of their curriculum online and be able to provide for their existing students. But the initiative that we're talking about today was really geared towards unemployed learners. And what we said is, due to all of these factors hitting these populations, what can we do to provide them with something of value that will help them reskill and be more competitive for jobs as the crisis subsides and even during? And so we were able to reach learners in over 100 countries. We reached over 1 million citizens, and we had learners enroll in over 8.5 million courses. And here to talk a bit about how we did that and what we learned. In practice, I don't have a slide on this, but what we actually did was we put a website up that essentially advertised exactly the content that we would be able to offer. We made the entire Coursera catalog available, but we also curated specific courses that would be valuable for learners in these populations. And so where we targeted this content was around job readiness. So language, communication, self-management, what does it mean to be job ready? Training for displaced workers, really targeted towards entry-level roles in high demand fields. And we do a lot of work in this area. We call them often gateway certificates, and I'll speak a little bit more about them. Courses on entrepreneurship. So in this time when people were getting laid off, it's an ideal time also for people to start small businesses. And so a lot of content related to entrepreneurship. content on post-secondary training. So what does it mean when someone maybe has graduated or, sorry, hasn't graduated, but is looking to bulk up specific requirements to show that they're should be qualified for a new job. And then some digital literacy courses and job search and self-care courses. Things often, it was interesting, we were often surprised, but then quickly integrated into programs of the need for content that things like mindfulness, things like resiliency, often soft skills that are sometimes overlooked, but were important for a lot of these populations. So when we speak about retraining for entry-level roles, the way that we think about it is there's often learners are coming from a number of different places, but there are often bits of training in a number of fields that we can provide, get learners into what we call a gateway job that is a portal into higher paid jobs. And these exist across fields. And a lot of our mind share recently has been, how do we guide learners of different populations to these? Because oftentimes there's a lot of different options, but it's unclear what actually will help a learner not only get that immediate job, but then help them throughout their career. And so we've started working with a number of different organizations to build out these entry-level pathways. And one example that I'll mention to you, and we'll talk about it in a second here with this Google IT support pathway, which is a great example because you have an average salary for IT careers at $53,000 a year, so they're good jobs. And in the US alone, there's 215,000 unfilled IT jobs. And so we wanted to focus on these types of careers that had large openings, that had growth, and that pay well, so that we could train people into them towards ones where they actually had a chance of then growing a career in. And so what we've worked at Coursera to be building is a portfolio of professional certificate content that comes not necessarily from our top university partners from all over the world, but from our top companies of all over the world. And that we know are linked to those jobs because those are the experts in those careers and they can train people into them. And so I mentioned the Google IT cert. A quick flash on it that I think is interesting is what we've worked to do is work with Google to build partnerships where we have companies that are saying this content is so good that I am willing to hire learners from it. And we have 65 of the largest companies that are saying, I want to hire people from the certificate. And this is Walmart and Turner Block and Intel and PNC Bank and Bank of America. These are large companies that are saying this is good content that I want to hire from. And the same thing is true for our work with Facebook, for example, in social media marketing. The other interesting that we're seeing with some of these gateway credentials is that we're seeing institutions, degree granting institutions, start to say, you know what? Maybe someone gets their credential from starts working. Maybe they get an IT support career. Maybe they are in a job. And then maybe they want to get their university credential later. And so they're awarding credit for the Google IT support certificate and saying, we want those learners to come to us for a credential after. So again, some of the validation we're seeing for this approach. From a skills transformation perspective, we do a lot of work aligning the content that we provide learners with the labor market strategies of a given country. We work with individual countries to curate those skills towards the workforce development priorities that they're trying to reach, and then ultimately create pathways. And so, for example, have a snapshot of a pathway here where we can take someone from that was in the hospitality industry, which got hit extremely hard by COVID, and help them transition towards sales and give them content that comes from Salesforce. That's fantastic content to get someone immediately trained with no background to be a sales development representative. Pair that with content on basic business content, on basic sales content, and then add soft skills content on the side around communications, around productivity. And so a lot of our skills development work, skills transformation work, focuses on those areas of what are the pathways that are valid and helpful for a given country. I'll mention the Johns Hopkins, the work we did with Johns Hopkins, because they launched a course in May on Coursera to train contract tracers. And this is another great example of them saying, what actually can we do to provide a given pathway for a very real job? and we had over 600,000 people take this course and complete the course as of January. And many of them then were valuable to those communities. I'll stop here on the overview part and then jump into a couple quick examples. Just saying that what does Coursera do overall? For those of you not familiar, we have a platform where we work with over 86 million learners around the world. We're in every country. We get content from 150 of the best university partners in the world, the Yales, the HECs in Paris, the NUSs in Singapore, and we provide that content to over 6,300 both businesses that are looking to reskill their employees, governments that are looking to upskill citizens as well as government officials, and campuses all over the world that are looking to better train their universities and focus. And what the reason organizations come to us and the reason that we're really the leader in this space at this point for large scale programs is because we have a really virtuous ecosystem where, because we have this constant feedback coming from the employers, we know exactly what content is needed. And so we can quickly funnel that to educators to have that content be produced. In addition to all at the same time, because we have this great content, learners in every country are coming to us and saying, this is what I learned. These are the skills I want to learn. And a whole bunch of machine learning that happens in the back end based on what learners are searching for, what they're taking, and what occupations they're coming from and going to. I'll stop there and just quickly speak a bit about some of the lessons learned before transitioning to Chad, who's going to give some real country examples of what this looked like. I think when I think overall about what successful programs look like and what we've seen the best programs do is, one, they really define their goals well. So they start to say, these are the target populations I'm trying to reach. These are actually the stakeholders I have that can help make this happen. And then I can outline my metrics for success. And there's a lot more to unpack in the defining goal, but it's a lot of planning and it's a lot of thinking about what populations I have and what they actually need from a content perspective. There's an administration bucket. So having enough personnel support to actually manage a program effectively. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's not something you just turn on and get good outcomes. It's something you actually need a strong management team on the ground and champions to run. And at the same time, from a invitations and marketing perspective, something that needs to be planned. And we've seen programs that have planned it quite poorly and see worse outcomes from it. So briefly just mentioning, going into a little bit of detail of what some of these are. In terms of the defining the learner goal, we see it's about understanding learner needs, understanding the job market needs, creating the right incentives for those learners, and defining the success metrics. So in terms of the learner needs, what we're seeing is it's important to understand who the learners are. Are these all unemployed? With some of our larger government programs, it's a set of different populations. What are the skills that are valuable for them? So it's what we see is a lot of completion is not just a platform that is there and they can do it. So they can download content. It's available for them on their mobile phone with low data. But they need to want to finish. They need to know that it's going to have some impact on their career. And so a lot of thinking with the best programs do a lot of thinking around what are the skills that each population needs in my country, what might motivate them to participate, what are the job paths right now that they're looking at, and what are the job paths I can potentially provide for them. I would say that one way of doing this, and this is a kind of an Excel sheet that I put together a year or two ago, but often helps governments think through what their different populations are, how they're going to reach, how many people they're going to reach. And so again, it's that thinking in advance of what is my content and how am I going to reach these learners, and what does that look like? So is it a social media campaign? Is it are there specifically local essentially organizations on the ground that have these email addresses and have the contact with these learners? The job market piece, I think, is really important. So we've seen that the best programs actively link to job markets. They talk to companies. They might work with those companies. So some of our organizations and some of our clients actually will come from a background where their job is to bring more companies into their country. And so we work, for example, with, and I know Paula's on the call today. We work with CINDE in Costa Rica, and it's CINDE's job to encourage multinationals to come to Costa Rica and to stay in Costa Rica. And so their KPI to actually ensure that Costa Rican citizens are skilled such that they have the needs that those multinationals need. And I think it's a great example, and we've seen this in a number of other countries too, of the closer that the program links up front with the job market to get those companies that are local to say, these are the skills I need, that makes it valuable for the learners. And better yet is if they can have those companies say, I will interview learners coming out of these programs. We've seen that to be extremely effective. Program incentives, so job fairs, career roundtables, fast tracks to interviews, public recognition to celebrate learners, easier access to loans and capital for startups, remuneration for completions. We have a program in Pakistan that does this. Really, really helpful in terms of getting that learner to ultimately finish and see the value of completing the program. And then finally, just a lot of thought on success metrics. So what does it mean what does success look like? And I could have sworn I saw something in the chat and about completion metrics and outcomes, and we'll kind of come to that in a bit. But I think what's really important is to figure out what do you want to track, and we see very different versions of this, right? There are programs that only measure job outcomes, and job outcomes are difficult to just measure because there's a question of, well, what is the value of education? And I often think about what is the value of a liberal arts education, and there's a value for learners to learn material, to have more confidence, and whether they get a job specifically for that thing or not, we often track metrics around raises, around promotions at work, around specifically being more confident in a given field, around being able to transition to different fields. And so there are a lot of different programs with different ways of tracking, with different goals. But happy to specifically talk about some of the outcomes that we've tracked for this program and overall. And then finally, just briefly to mention the two other areas are administering learning programs and marketing. A lot of this is fairly self-explanatory, but it's really important to have strong stakeholders. And so we've seen that the programs that don't often suffer. And so having those champions and that on the platform do all that work to be inviting learners, to be reminding learners of this is a program they have access to, life comes up. And a lot of time, a lot of these learners that have been unemployed or maybe have multiple kids, maybe are doing other tasks that this is a priority, but it's one of many. And so building those programs and building out those reminders to actually continue funneling learners through is critical. And the final piece is just to say that we've seen a lot of missteps around invitations, and we've seen a lot of best practices around invitations, that it's really important to figure out, how am I getting to these learners? Our most successful learners that enrolled tens of thousands of learners very, very quickly had ways to reach them. They had the email addresses, they knew where those learners were, and they were able to design messaging to reach them. Our less successful programs might have designed multi-step programs to ask learners to sign up for something and then went dark for a while, and then asked them to do a different thing and then went dark for a while. And so it's about thinking through what that messaging essentially the pathway was that we saw was most effective. So let me stop there, because I know that that's high level without any of the interesting, exciting, this is what a few countries did. So let me transition to my colleague Chad, who's going to dive into some really great examples.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. Shall I?
Yeah, share yours.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you in different time zones. Really looking forward to sharing some of our work in the last year globally. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Can you all see my screen now? Yeah, great, perfect. So just following on from Matt's points, this was a massive undertaking globally to reach out to over 110 countries. I think the final number ended up being closer to 120 countries all over the world, with vastly different ecosystems for learning. Some of them didn't even have online learning ecosystems at all. This was a great experiment for many countries to actually, at scale, for the first time, on a single platform, provide training to their entire citizen sort of and labor market. And so as we rolled out the program, we were very conscious of that diversity in terms of where there was capacity, where there wasn't capacity, the restrictions that some countries would have with bandwidth access, even with Wi-Fi access for learners. So as we designed the program before we launched it, we were very conscious of curating courses that had the most job relevant, most in demand job related courses as a starting point to offer that kind of pre-curated collection to the government agencies, nonprofits and NGOs that we'd work with. So they'd have something to start with and they wouldn't have to build it from scratch. In addition to curating that job readiness sort of content, which included soft skills like job readiness, mental well-being, resilience, plus more technical skills across technology, data science, and finance, we also combined the offering with some of our short guided projects, which are sort of 45-minute to 1 hour on average projects that allow a learner to build something very specific in a very short amount of time, like build your first website. Create your first e-commerce platform for your small business in the country where you are. So we combined larger, deeper learning, transformational learning gateway certificates, some of which Matt talked about, with those very small guided hands-on projects in the offering. The second element that we thought about was about sustainability. You know, offering this to governments who haven't really had experience doing this sort of programming, ever in many cases. How do we help them to get set up and build the capacity within the government to be able to manage such a big project? So we had webinars that Coursera teams led for the government agencies to train them on how to become an admin on the platform. And essentially we gave them the keys to the platform. We allowed them to invite learners themselves, to delete learners. We allowed them to curate the content that we had given them, to delete some of the courses, to add from our wider catalog. We gave access to 4,000 courses on the back end of the catalog and about 300 pre-curated courses. So they could play and tweak with it. In the UK, for example, we worked across local economic partnerships, which are different localized agencies across England, for example. And what they did was they took some of our content, deleted some of the offerings that we'd made and dipped into our catalog, picking very localized relevant content from their lens that they felt would be much more relevant to the learners in their regions. Other countries, we help them with the sort of portal in terms of the navigation aspect. So we don't have courses in every single language in the world. Yet we wanted for learners to be able to access the platform and be signposted once they got into the program. So for example, in Greece, when we created the dashboard and the program for them, we actually had Greek language used to actually welcome the learners in with a welcome message, send an email to the learner in Greek. And as they entered the platform, they could navigate the different collections, which were signposted in Greek. In Kazakhstan, we did something similar in Russian and Kazakh language. So working with the local agency, they helped us to translate some of those signpostings across the program to allow the learners to better access the platform. So quite a big range of variation in terms of the types of programs we worked with, the types of capacity we met with on the other side from the government side. And I think you could see that. I'll talk more about specific cases, but the main challenge that kept coming up consistently was the commitment from the government side and the dedication of resources from their side. You can imagine that where programs are very successful, government dedicated time, and they put thinking into how they were going to roll the program out. Countries like Estonia, we ended up training 1% of the entire country's population because Estonia used social media, they had a very clear plan, and they were able to leverage the platform we gave them very effectively. Countries like Lithuania did similarly. We trained 14% of the Lithuanian workforce. Countries like Guyana, where the Minister of Education was very hands-on with the program and went on radio broadcasts almost daily, put social media posts out into the market. We had 5% of the entire population of Guyana actually on the Coursera platform registered and trained. The second bit and the second element of this was the dashboard of analytics. Because this was going to probably be, in most cases, the first time these countries would have access in one platform to the skills of their population, we were really keen for them to see that data live and have access to the tracking. So as part of the dashboard that we built, they could see the level of the skills of the learners, mastery over time, number of enrollments, completions, average learning hours it took to complete a course. And that was really rich data for the first time for these government agencies to actually see what the state of skills was in their particular country. In terms of the outreach to get this thing moving and launching it, we reached out to countries we were already in contact with. And you can see the quote from the President of Colombia. We have a long-standing relationship with the government of Colombia and the President's office. We have partnerships with universities in Colombia, and we're very sort of in close contact with many of the ministries. So that was easy to sort of connect very quickly and launch the program. There were other countries where we had no contact with the government agencies, like Bhutan or Albania or Fiji or Kiribati or Vanuatu, smaller countries where they essentially heard through word of mouth about the program or through our partnerships with the World Bank, with ADB, with the Commonwealth of Learning, with UNDP, essentially contacting the governments on our behalf and saying, by the way, there's this really fantastic program that's come up and we would love for you to be part of it. There's no cost, it's completely pro bono, it's a social impact program, and we highly encourage you to look into it. And those introductions were really critical in very quickly reaching decision makers who could approve the program and then eventually champion the programs as we develop them across these countries. The other sort of point on this is that we had some very interesting stories. When we launched the program in a couple of countries, Ghana was one example, the government got all these sort of worried calls from the police in Ghana saying, oh, there's this scam that people are saying Coursera is giving free content. That can't be the case. How is this even possible? So there was even mistrust from some of the local populations about a completely free, no strings program to help unemployed people. They hadn't really had something like this happening before in some of these areas, especially in underserved and more marginalized communities that have not been exposed to training programs at this scale. And so we worked very closely with the government agencies to spread the word and in fact say, no, this is real, there is no cost, this is a completely pro bono social impact program. The fantastic thing about this was that Coursera, as this was evolving, has applied for B Corp status in the US, which is public benefit status, which really aligns well with our social impact approach to this. So we're officially now also a B Corp corporation, which aligns to these programs. And I've given you examples of ADB, Commonwealth, UNESCO, and World Economic Forum, because we wouldn't have been able to reach some of these governments in the time we did, or even at all, without their partnership and their backing to introduce us as a credible partner in this space. So we really owe lots of thanks to their partnership. And another key factor in reaching learners very quickly, very effectively in underserved communities was the use of mobile. Our courses are fully mobile compatible. A learner can download a course even offline without Wi-Fi access, download the course, start doing it, and then go back to a Wi-Fi hotspot to upload their course results or their tests or exams, and then go offline again and keep learning without a Wi-Fi connection, and then come back at the end of the course to upload the content of the course. So this was a really critical tool in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, like in Namibia, in South Sudan, where people didn't have access to laptops or iPads or desktops. They could just use their mobile. In addition, where countries didn't have, learners didn't have smartphones, we work very closely with regional libraries, library associations, like across Africa and Asia, where the learner could actually go into a physical place, sit there and use a computer to actually take the course with mentors and help desks set out. And I'll give you an example of where that all came together really, really well. It was our partnership with the Commonwealth of Learning, which is a member organization of the Commonwealth of Nations. They're represented by 29 member states across 50 member states and 29 associated member states across 6 continents. They were able to actually sign up 79 different countries in the program with us. And the Commonwealth was fantastic because they set up help desks across many countries, like in Angola, in Mali, in South Sudan, where learners could actually be supported fully from the journey of turning on a computer in a library to actually going through the course, asking questions if they were stuck, and getting tips from the instructors and mentors on their side. So a fantastic approach to kind of grassroots learning and embracing of people who normally wouldn't have access to any of this, and to this type of educational outcome or learning. We also, in this program, work very closely with dozens of ministries of education. So it was a multilateral partnership approach. We had Commonwealth of Learning as the key sort of coordinating body, with ministries of education across all of the countries that are participating, plus regional associations, library associations, and the help desks that were set out. Without all of these key components, it would have been very difficult to not only get national buy-in and endorsement, but drive the program and drive the learners throughout all of this. One element as well that we worked with on the Commonwealth was virtual convocations. We wanted to create excitement and inspire people. And so we had learners who completed their courses, showing their Coursera certificates, because that was also part of this program. Not only do you get the dashboard as the government and you get the analytics as part of this program and the curation, the learners get certificates when they complete the courses, as long as they've passed their exams and assessments. So as 2,000 learners completed courses in Africa, we launched the first virtual convocation, where we had video testimonials from learners across 42 different countries, talking about their learning journey, what it meant to them, and some of the outcomes they were seeing. And I remember one learner, I believe it was from Rwanda, actually said, I got a job at the World Bank in IT. I wouldn't have gotten that had it not been for this training program. Never thought I'd have access to something like this in my life. So thank you very much for making this happen. Thank you to the partners and to the employers who recognized this credential that I got from Coursera, the World Bank, and actually hired me for this job. And these virtual convocations are still ongoing, actually. We had another one for the Caribbean, which had 6 different Caribbean senior ministers attend, and another few thousand learners who graduated showcasing their achievements. We'll have more across Asia and the Pacific Islands in the next 2 months. But this was a fantastic way also to spread the word to people in communities who thought, this is quite daunting. I'm not sure if this will work for me. What's the point of it? What's sort of the outcome that I should expect? Hearing it directly from the learners and their experiences really encouraged other people to sign up in the program. And so this is an ongoing partnership we'll have with the Commonwealth for at least the next couple of years to continue helping to train more and more people at scale in underserved communities. The second case study I wanted to talk about is a government ministry. So this was kind of, I would say, the majority of partners we had in the program were government ministries of labor, ministries of social protection. In this case, the Philippines Department of Science and Technology. Were very keen to partner with us. We reached 75,000 learners enrolled, 2.4 million completed enrollments with 1.4 million learning hours. So quite a vast scale. And the thing is, this actually didn't take very long for them to achieve. This was done in just a space of a couple of months. The key here was the use of social media. They had a Facebook page set up from the beginning of the program. They kept tweeting, sending messages on Instagram, Facebook messages, WhatsApp groups to spread the word, first of all, but then create a community of learning where learners could share their experiences and say, oh, yes, I took that course. That's a really good one. And you can see a quote here from one of the learners. She's in the medical EMT space as a nurse. And she said, I took this course because I'm an ordinary person. I needed to acquire life-saving skills. I gained knowledge of emergencies and to understand what medical people do to help injured people. And it's inspired her to become an EMT. And these stories spread virally across social media as people kept hearing more and more about what their community members were doing, their neighbors, their colleagues, their friends. And in one case, Somaliland did a really fantastic job of social media networking and messaging. Somaliland, the government we work with there, the Ministry of Employment, Social Affairs and Family, they actually would tag specific courses in our curation to the beneficiary groups that they thought most relevant. So they tag a course from Johns Hopkins, the COVID-19 one mentioned earlier, and they would tag it to hospitals and departments of health within their education system and practitioners, doctors and nurses, and say, by the way, this is a great course for you as an audience, to make it really relevant and directly connect the learner to a track that would be relevant to what they needed. And so seeing this evolution of social media, it was really inspiring because I was on a couple of webinars. I was on one with EdTech in Malaysia, the Malaysia Economic Development Corporation that we worked with. And we had learners essentially just asking questions to the Coursera team, to myself, to the EdTech administrators, any questions they wanted. In sub-Saharan Africa and Nigeria, we worked with a nonprofit where we had Instagram live sessions where I would come in, my colleagues would come in, members of the organization, the nonprofit would come on, and learners would ask for tips. You know, what courses should I take? What track should I go through? What's the best way to approach online learning? We've never done this before. Please help us along this journey. You know, what are the sort of challenges we should expect as we go through this program? And what will happen after I take the course? Can you guarantee me I'll get a job? And that was always a very hard one from some of the learners because we can't guarantee that, but we can help push the needle quite far into giving them job relevant skills needed in their local economy. And the next case study is exactly about that. In this case, it was neither a government ministry nor a nonprofit or an NGO. It was the foreign direct investment promotion arm of Costa Rica called CINDE. CINDE's mandate is to attract companies and foreign direct investment into the country. And as part of that mandate, they have to be a catalyst to ensure that their citizens have the skills necessary to work in those companies and in those sectors. CINDE looks across their industries, across light manufacturing, life sciences, services, agribusiness, food processing, and tourism. And they speak regularly and engage very deeply with the companies in their country to understand their skills needs. Before they even launch programs, they ask them for what do you need in the next 2-3 years in terms of skills? What's going to make your company expand its footprint in Costa Rica? What's going to make a company in Boston be able to come to Costa Rica and set up here? What are the skills we need? What are the training paths and tools we need to implement to quickly convert people who have been hired into companies into roles that are needed in those companies, or help them being promoted into the company or shift career paths? And so with CINDE, they already have a very, very strong grip in terms of what the skills needs are of the country. And as we work with them, they were fully engaged with the private sector. They even would do phone calls to the learners to get them engaged, to find out what was going on with the learners. How are they progressing through the program? They would then speak to the private sector and say, we are doing these programs for 10,000 people in this particular domain or these particular topics. We have a lot of content in Spanish, whether spoken native in Spanish from our Spanish partners or subtitled. So this was a massively positive tool in CINDE's arsenal to actually help in terms of upskilling across the country. And I'm also conscious that CINDE will be working on English language training and tourism content to further improve the skills benchmarking of the country. So 3 very different examples, but you can see in terms of the impact we had, the critical link in all of this was that commitment and that ownership by our partners in the programs. They didn't just take the program and said, great, we'll see how many people sign up. Where programs were successful was where they really took the lead and drove the programs. In Estonia, we had a one-person team member who essentially, beyond her 9-to-5 job in the ministry, she would actually spend her evenings sending out social media posts and getting learners signed up on her own. And that was what drove us to training 1% of the entire country within just a couple of months. And that commitment's really critical to all of our partnerships. And that's where we get into the challenges. There are quite a number of challenges because of such a vast diversity of countries and agencies we worked with. We worked with federal ministries, we worked with regional government and state governments, we worked with cities and municipalities within cities and local government councils in England, for example. All of them had different challenges and different needs. Many of them had out-of-date records on who were the unemployed citizens. They didn't have that in a central, neat package that they could say, okay, here you go, here's 10,000 people who are unemployed, let's invite them onto the program. Some countries did have that. Kazakhstan and Ukraine actually had pretty strong, sort of well-organized data in terms of who's unemployed and who's been furloughed. Other countries didn't. And other countries even said to us, well, even if we do think we have that data, we don't want to just stop there and be passive about it, just dip into that database. We want to do a big, fresh social media PR campaign to reach people who may not be on that database or who may be freshly unemployed or furloughed that didn't have time to register for benefits. So we don't know that they're unemployed. Greece was an example of that too. The Greek labor force is quite fragmented in terms of having seasonal workers that work during the summer tourist months, and then the rest of the year they're unemployed. So they're pseudo-employed, pseudo-unemployed. The Greek government's not quite sure where to put them. And in that case, we reached out to essentially anyone who was interested in being upskilled. We kept the parameters quite open. We didn't restrict it to only unemployed people. Some countries did. They said we only want to focus, like Latvia was very clear, we just want to focus on unemployed people for now. And then as the program evolves, we can then open it up further. Other countries didn't. They went very broad. They had a website link where learners actually filled in their email and name and maybe ticked a couple of boxes saying, yes, I'm unemployed, no, I'm not employed, and gave a bit of a profile and then came into the program. But that record and that database is really critical to have because it delays the launch in many ways to get the full access to the learners that you need to get to. The other challenge was inaccurate skills records. Many of the countries worked on hadn't seen all of their unemployed people in one place before, in one uniform platform. They didn't know what the skills gaps were. They didn't know, should they do more sort of entrepreneurship training for their people? Should it be more on the basis of like finance skills? Should it be tech skills, data science? What is the need of the country in terms of skills? That was often very sort of out of date, unmapped in most countries or unknown. And so as the program evolved and they saw the gaps emerging, because our dashboard can show you that, it shows where the gaps are in a particular country compared to other countries. Are you lagging? Are you cutting edge? Are you emerging? And they could kind of see where their learners were actually struggling and then take more of our content to fill that gap. The other key sort of challenge was government agencies often just didn't have the resources to support these programs in the way that could really leverage it fully and optimize them. They worked their 9-to-5 jobs, many of them people working from home. with limited connectivity. They just often didn't also understand how to run programs. And in those cases, we worked very closely to teach them how to run an online program and do webinars. In Gambia, this was a good example of where the government was very, very keen and essentially trying to figure out how to best align across different government agencies. Should it be one agency that takes this program forward? Should it be multiple agencies that coordinate in the program? Who has ownership and how it should be coordinated? In the end, it was led by the President's Office as the key sort of champion agency, with all the other agencies aligned in terms of submitting their candidates for training into the program. Local language was another challenge. I mentioned the example of Sinde, and one of the success factors being our content in Spanish. We have a lot of content in Spanish. We have a lot of content in Russian, in French increasingly. We didn't have a lot of content, and we still don't, in Thai, in Bahasa. We actually have a lot of Vietnamese content, but not Thai and Bahasa. So programs that were launched in those countries, we expected to see very little uptake. And actually, I was quite surprised. We still saw lots and lots of people, thousands of people in countries that didn't have, where we didn't have language content sign up. And I looked through what they were signing up for. It was quite interesting. They were taking English language courses, business English, how to present in English. So even where we didn't have data science in Bahasa or in Thai, the learners entered the program and were very resourceful with the government's guidance too. And they found content that could still be useful for them if they were in the tourism industry, improving their English language speaking ability. Was quite an interesting one. So we saw a lot of that happening on the program. The domains were also quite a mix. We saw people signing up for such a big range of data science, technology, business, well-being, and soft skills across the program. It was quite a good mix to see that. Matt had touched upon this earlier too. The metrics for success when we worked with our government partners, our NGO partners, and so on, was very, very sort of diverse. Some governments, I mentioned the case of Gambia, we just wanted to see, actually, because it had never been done before at this scale, how many people would sign up and enroll. For them, that was a really important metric of success, just to see digitally how we could penetrate the country and get people enrolled. Other countries were very keen on job and labor market outcomes. I saw a couple of questions in the chat about that. And they wanted to see, what's going to shift unemployed people into jobs. And so we're still working through that data. The program only ended last week. So we'll be spending the next several weeks still collating that data on job outcomes. There were some cases, like in Nigeria, we worked with a nonprofit. They had 1,790 people enrolled, about 1,000 completed, and then 200 of those people got jobs during the program. And we're very keen to see what happens now that the program's ended with those 200 people and the number increasing from there. But that was just one example of where you could actually track it during the program phase, before even completion. People were getting jobs from these training programs. And I guess the last bit of the challenge is the sustainability element. We work with so many of these partners across these various countries. They're mostly now able to administer a platform. They know how to invite learners. They know how to essentially curate content through an online platform. So they have these skills that can be made quite useful in the future for larger and continued programming. So we're very keen to see how we can continue the momentum built in this first phase, where countries for the very first time got access to data to build business cases. The ministries now have examples of X amount of thousands of people in their country going online, learning, completing, building skills at their fingertips. So we're very keen to work with them to actually build on this momentum for longer term sustainable training in the future. So I wanted to pause there for questions from the audience.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Matt. Talking about metrics for success, if you can see the amount of activity in the chat box, I think that's a metric of success of this session, and just the amount of interest that your sharing of your work has generated. I don't think we'll be able to a lot of the really good questions, and we will continue the conversation. Maybe I can just start with a few and then see how much time we have. So there's some questions about incentives. What incentive structure for the universities to provide this free of cost? Then there's another question, quite a few questions around your programs. What is the tuition fee if it's free? And what is and linked to that, what is your business model, or what is really your partnership model? And then there's another question, and I'll stop after that, around how do you actually teach soft skills, and what's your experience with that? How do you teach emotional resilience, for example? So maybe I'll stop there and then hand it back to you and then come for another round of questions. And both of you have done a great job in multitasking, and you did questions as you were talking. I don't know how you were doing that. But
we're tag teaming. I was answering during Chad's and Chad was answering during mine's. Yeah, definitely try to keep up. So it's a great question. So we, in terms of how this is sustainable for the universities, the way it works is governments will, right now, many are spending, I would argue, way too much money on reskilling programs that are not as effective as they should be. A lot of these are face-to-face programs. A lot of these are targeted towards skills that are not necessarily the ones that actually will help their learners get long-term jobs, sustainable jobs, and help them put them in those programs quickly. And so the way that we work is a lot of governments will come to us. They say, hey, look, I'm spending all this on reskilling programs. I want to do something more efficient. And we'll say, great. What we charge is a low cost per learner that has access to the platform over a given time period. So our agreements are 2 years. And so as we engage in those programs, we share a lot of that revenue back with the universities that are creating that content. So it makes sense for the universities. They own the IP. If a company is the expert in a given field and they're the ones authoring the content, they will receive that. And so it's a way that we're actually able to incentivize them to keep producing the right content and keep delivering value for the governments that we work with. I can't remember if there was another question that was in there too.
No, about soft skills. What's your experience in terms of what you teach, and how do you teach that? Soft skills and emotional resilience.
Yeah, I would say it's critical. And oftentimes I remember in more than one country presentation, I remember we were in one with the president of Costa Rica where he stopped us. We were going through some slides on technical skills and soft skills. And he stopped us and said, no, human skills, like that's what I want to focus on. That's what's critical. And we've seen that time and time again. It's not just a matter of, for a lot of these countries, focusing on technical skills, but providing the soft skills along with it. So a lot of the content on Coursera that we will recommend for these programs is in those areas. So that might be negotiation, it might be leadership, it might be communication, it might be resiliency. And depending on the goal of the specific program, we'll recommend different pieces of content. We make everything available. So anyone that works with us is able to pull from our catalog, say, you know what, I know that Coursera thinks this one is good. I actually really like this one. We're going to do this program on leadership rather than this program on leadership. Everyone can do that and mix and match and tailor, but we have a team of skills transformation advisors that will often recommend, based on specific populations, what actually is going to be most valuable for that group. And so one example is we have a program with UNDP, and they have a leadership program where they are trying to teach leadership to a number of different types of individuals across UNDP. We'll recommend different leadership programs for different types of staff, and that's only within the company. So you can imagine within populations, there are different types, for example, of leading teams, content on leading teams that might be valuable for one population, but we want to use something different for different populations.
Okay, and maybe perhaps just the last, we have just about 1 minute and you might have just like maybe 60 seconds to respond. So I think this is sort of a bunch of questions around testing your appetite for more. Like I think that you can see some of my colleagues asking, what can they do to bring you to that country, or maybe begin an engagement with the country government? Do you have, I see a colleague of mine saying, would you have like a one-pager that just lists all of the offerings and maybe the pricing, and that your website is great to courses, but not necessarily for people like us who are thinking about working with governments or working with other partners. How can they be like, could you, if you have, then could you share that? And so some of my colleagues are asking whether you're interested in perhaps partnership in other countries in Africa, like Cameroon and Gabon. So it's broad questions about, do you have appetite for more?
Absolutely. So I would say yes. We would love to work with any country that you work with and would love to support. And so I would say the best place is definitely the website is a good place to start, not the Coursera.org website, but the Coursera for Government website. Because often what that does is it starts a conversation where there's a link where someone just fills out, great, I'm coming from this country, I'm trying to reach this number of people. And then someone from our team immediately then engages and says, great, how you. So that's the easiest way to do it. And we're doing another revamp of the site in the next few months, 2 months or so, 3 months or so, because it doesn't even reflect all of the countries we work with. It was put together a couple of years. I would say definitely you can feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address, Chad, I'll put his email address. And what we'll do is we'll redirect you the way that our government team structure. So we have a dedicated team focused on working with governments. And so we have different people that are responsible for different regions and engaging across those regions, both from engaging the government's perspective, as well as providing skills transformation and working with different governments in the long term. So anyway, definitely you can also get in touch with me by email and we'll route you to the right person. And we would love to work with you. I think maybe that's the message. And Chad, I want to leave a sec for you to maybe say the same thing, but it's been a pleasure having us, and really we want to help countries think through how do you engage in more productive workforce programs? How do you get the outcomes you want? How do you use some of this content that companies are demanding and do it at low cost? We're happy to help, and that's why we're here.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you, Chad. It's been such a pleasure to host you and to share the work that you're doing. I can see a lot of follow-up questions will happen, and I've also wanted to say to everybody, I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to your question, but I think this is an ongoing conversation, and we are also happy to facilitate a connection with Matt and Chad in case you missed their email here. Happy to facilitate. Shannon, I'm sure, would also be happy to make that connection with the Coursera project. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chad. We will be in touch again. Also, to all of you, we'll share the recording of the session today and also the slides that Matt and Chad presented. So thank you. Thank you all for joining, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.